Her research title is The Perceived Effects of COVID-19 Aftermath on the Business Model and Operational Strategy of Philippine-based firms in construction materials supply industry. Latest construction statistics on different building permits approved from January to March show that the number of construction projects fell 22.4% to 30,838 from 39,762 in 2018. That is according to Philippine Statistics Authority. The construction sector is one of the important industries the government has been focusing on since 2016. With the aid to build more infrastructure construction to help ease traffic and trade across all regions, 100 infrastructure flagship projects have been prepared by the public sector as of February 17, 2020. Consumer group called on the Duterte government to maximize the use of local construction materials for its flagship Build program to help sustain jobs of Filipinos amid the pandemic. The DTI, for its part, expressed support to the use of local construction materials, particularly cement, for projects under the program. As for DTI Secretary Ramon Lopez, said that if the cement, steel pipes, metal sheets are locally made up to standard, prefer local. That is to patronize local products and to help boost other industries and job generation for many Filipinos.
So construction projects during COVID-19 suffers from lack of activity while the cases rises, and this also caused the movement of construction materials to be limited and affecting the supply chain performance of the industry. For every organization, resources are limited and therefore critical for success will be to direct the available resources in the right directions. For this purpose, it will be valuable identifying the key business processes and creating a strategic plans for future and for the so-called new normal with the expected recovery and rebound with the easing of quarantine measures, but not totally as it the construction material supply chain players will have to strictly abide with the redefined business conduct. So for the supply chain management, industrialized construction has raised the requirements for the procurement of materials and services in the supply chain management. So there are numerous technologies to explore that would increase safety, productivity, reduce costs, and enable parts of the infrastructure supply to transform safety on sites. So for the solutions that are recommended is to have a tracking device, cameras or devices to detect risk, automated risk learning, movement analytics, and remote site inspections or management. So with the consumers resorting more to online shopping and amid pandemic restrictions, entrepreneurs and business owners have embraced the digital phenomenon for an online shopping and extended applications even to the industrial sector. So technology has already transformed online businesses such as Infinite Marketplace where conducting business has become more convenient and efficient for both vendors and vendees. The COVID-19 pandemic has made this marketplace a more obvious necessity. So additionally, online sellers and other facilitators of online trading have different functions and responsibilities. Individuals who have obligations relative to online business transactions are not limited to those who are e-commerce business owners that possess website and sell their goods. So services online includes those online intermediaries who are third parties that offer intermediation services between the online sellers and buyers. Online shopping or retailing involving customers such as buying goods or services from a seller over the internet without an intermediary service. So with the cited developments, trends, and economic shifts that the construction materials supply industry segment is facing, it would be interesting to find an answer to the questions such as is there a need to revisit and change the business model of players and said industry segment, and what business model and operation strategy changes will have to be undertaken to adapt to the new normal, and accordingly, a study is incumbent to assess the perceived effects of the pandemic and its aftermath on the business firms in the industry with the following objectives, such as first is to determine the pandemic-related changes affecting the business activities of the construction material supply segment players and perceived effects of such changes. And next is to identify the significant external and internal factors contributing to the shift in business model and operation strategy of the construction material supplier firms. And lastly is to recommend an improved business model, platform, and operational framework for construction material supplier firms towards the new normal. So the results of the study is will benefit to the players in the construction material supply segment of the construction industry, and findings will provide insights to business firms and in said industry segment as basis for rethinking their operation strategy, and if needed, their business model would be a better understanding and depth appreciation of the new normal factors that would help in figuring out the better platforms such as e-commerce applications and supply chain online integration with customers and upstream suppliers that can help the business to at least survive, if not thrive, in a very important segment of the construction industry that serves the infrastructure trust of the government in nation building and economic development. So our coverage is will focus on resellers and retailers in the construction industry as the unit of analysis, more particularly importers and hardware stores supplying basic construction essentials like cement, steel and iron, ceramics, wood, and chemical-based products, and the study will look into their current business practices as compared to pre-COVID-19 normal times, as well as their resources and capabilities, deemed once as strategic assets before but now as strategic liabilities that have to be addressed in the light of the new normal requirements. So next is Chapter 2 Methodology. So the main goal of the study is to assess the perceived effects of the pandemic and its aftermath on the construction material supply firms, and in order to review the business model and operation strategy to cope up with the repercussions of the pandemic and to recommend a long-term strategy and medium-term tactics to move on to the new normal. So the study will be guided by the following topic illustrated by the following conceptual framework prior to the pandemic. The business model of construction material supplier firm is hinged on the smooth flow of materials such as local and imported and informations such as order codes and canvas sheets, and physical transactions such as store visits and sample presentations in invoicing and face-to-face negotiation, and lastly the bill of materials until the COVID-19 outbreak. So the study will endeavor to confirm the changes brought about by the pandemic effects to the firms under study in terms of the various commercial and operational activities that are covered by their business model and operation strategy. So, also one objective that we will focus to prove that these changes have a significant effects on the business moves that make up the need to adapt the business model and supply chain operations of the concerned firms. So this will be the consistent with the business context, which is covered by extant literature that external and internal factors, specifically supply chain factors, have a bearing to influence a company's way of doing business. So how to generate sales, revenues, and earn profit, and how to structure its operation in meeting the market needs and changing customer wants. So, our hypothesis, in view of said changes in the industry and the need to revisit the business model and operation strategy, hypotheses are drawn up to strengthen the causal relationship of the constructs of external and supply chain factors and COVID-19 related changes and new requirements. And the firm's business model and operation strategy elements have the following hypotheses are in the next slide. So for H1 sub O, the COVID-19 related changes and protocols have no significant effect on the construction material supplier firms, business model and operation strategy. So next is H1A. The COVID-19 related changes and protocols have a significant effect on the construction material supplier firms, business model and operation strategy. Next is H2 sub O. The COVID-19 related changes and protocols have no moderating effect on the relationship between external and supply chain factors and the business model and operation strategy of the construction material supplier firms. H sub 2. The COVID-19 related changes and protocols have a moderating effect on the relationship between external and supply chain factors and the business model and operation strategy of the construction materials firm.
This is our SEM framework that was derived from the conceptual framework. It still consists of the three main constructs, which are external factors, the supply chain, rise of COVID-19 cases, business model, and operation strategy. Under such constructs, we have derived four latents. For the external factors, we use the PEST analysis for the analysis, or political, legal, economic, socio-cultural, and the technological. The side of rise of COVID-19 case construct, we have business impact, health and safety protocols, IATF restrictions, and supply chain factors. Well, for the business model and operation strategy, the four latents would be revenue, cost, resources, and capabilities. Under such latents, we are able to ask three questions for each, which is defined by P1, P2, and P3. And the rest be the same. The first latent of the SEM framework is the political legal. So, under its description, it aims to determine whether the latest protocols of the government significantly influence industry behavior. So, under external analysis, we have the code T1, T2, and T3 with the description of social distancing, downsized manpower or skeletal workforce as implemented, and lockdowns. So these three would try to determine whether it significantly affected the industry behavior given that the government has called on such protocols. The second latent of the RSEM framework is economic, which aims to know the extent on how the industry is affected by the rise of COVID-19. So we have here the three codes, E1, E2, and E3, which describes as increase of prices, slow recovery of the economy, and the inability to meet market demand. So under external factors, we try to know the extent of these three items on how it really affected the industry. The third item for external analysis is the socio-cultural. So, which aims to determine the extent of influence of the recent protocols and restrictions. So, we have here health protocols, implement or impacts of travel bans, and effective management and treatment protocol. These items would answer whether it really influence or the extent of influence of such protocols with regards to socio-cultural. And the last, under our external factors, or pest analysis is the technological. So it aims to measure the readiness of businesses in the industry towards future and the new normal. So we try to extract whether for such members of industry is ready for the convenience, the flexibility of payment method, and the ease of digital transformation towards a newer or future. Another item is supply chain. So it aims to measure the depth of losses with regards to the limits in the supply chain. Given that the COVID has risen, the pandemic, so we try to measure how much delays, limits in incoming of imported goods, and shortage of locally exported items really affected the supply chain of the construction industry or construction supply industry. One effect that the COVID pandemic has brought is IATF restriction. So, under this item, we try to analyze management services involving health and safety protocols. Given that the IATF brought travel bans, losses, and restriction in movements, we try to measure the consequences, how much is the unpredicted losses, and what restrictions has been or the impact of the restrictions made by the IATF. Another item that the rise of COVID-19 brought is health and safety protocols. So we aim to determine health and safety measures with respect to business operations. Given that we have health protocols, travel bans also, and effective management treatment protocol, we determine what depth does these items brought in the construction supply industry. The COVID-19 has brought impacts to businesses, and we measure the perceived effect of COVID-19 pandemic to the construction supply in this materials industry. So we try to determine the effects in the limits in transactions, update in operations, manpower, and activity reduction under this business impact item. One item under business model and operation strategy is revenue. So, under SEM framework, we determine also the revenue, sales, and the market behavior of the industry. So, under revenue, we determine the losses, the inadequate revenue items, perceived inadequate revenue, and the drop in consumer demand, whether it really dropped or not. Another item in business model and operation strategy is the cost, which aims to determine sectors' operating woes brought by the pandemic's health and safety protocols. So, this item, we try to determine the labor cost, price hike, and the cost of depreciation, whether the members of industry really agree in these items. If these items really happened or whether these items really affected the business model and operation strategy of their business. For resources item, we aim to identify restrictive circumstances that cuts back the business model and operating strategies of business sector. In this item, we determine obstructions in mobility, estimated time of arrival, and the quality control. So, we focus on this item mainly, of course, in words resources. The last item in the SEM framework is capability. So, it aims to analyze solutions to cope up with the new normal. So, under this item, we have re-strategizing online transactions, safety and assurance. So, we wanted to measure the capabilities and the readiness of these construction materials industry members in coping up the new normal. For data gathering, a survey will be conducted as the major instrument with questions pertaining to the indicator variables believed to have significant relationship and interactions effects among the three main constructs. The survey will be administered to the owners, managers, and major clients of importers, distributors, and small to medium-sized retailers of construction supply materials, particularly hardware stores. The researchers will also use the business model and value proposition canvas to gather data relevant to the pre-pandemic and current situation of the construction material supply industry. The needed data for these tools will come from both literature and interview to determine the changes that will affect external and internal factors influencing the need to revisit the business model and operations platform. Target respondents will be coming from owners, managers, and clients of two companies each. From the importation sector, the hardware store operators, and distributor format side. A total of at least 200 respondents will be targeted to meet the requirements of a non-complex model with linear relationships with some possible interactions among the different latent and indicator variables. SEM is regarded as a causal modeling approach focused on maximizing the explained variance of the dependent latent constructs rather than reporting a theoretical covariance matrix. PLS SEM can estimate complex relationships and emphasize prediction while simultaneously relaxing the demands on data specification of relationships. This method was selected in view of the face-to-face limitations to facilitate testing of the above hypothesis by obtaining the p-value, r-square, covariance, and ANOVA parameters to determine the significant causal factors that can formulate necessary business model considerations and operation strategy enhancements. The desired output of this research results from SEM will be expected to point out different causal factors and significant relationship under investigation in the operational framework as contained in the logic of the conceptual framework. These factors will determine which areas of improvement will be focused in order to enhance the business model of the firms under study and accordingly improve the operations platform of said business firms to get back on track to gain traction with construction industry stakeholders and segment customers. Structural changes, if indicated in the results of the SEM analysis, will be incorporated in the recommendations for the construction material supplier firms and the construction industry in the Philippines toward the new normal. The questionnaire to be distributed will be in the form of Likert scale. So state your perceived experience with the statements below or the questions we would be distributing. Please choose the number that best represents your answer. So 1 would be the strongly disagree and 5 would be strongly agree. For each latent, we are inspired by the different RRS of this study, and thus we derive these three questions for each latent for political, legal, economic, socio-cultural, and technological factors. This would be the exact questionnaire that we would be distributing in terms of external factors and supply chain. For the questions with regards to the effects of COVID-19 in the pre and post-pandemic, the questions is also inspired and derived from the RRLs gathered throughout the research, and this would be the exact questions that we would be distributing. The last construct of the SEM framework is the business model and operations strategy. In this construct, the questions are also derived from the RRL of the research. The questions in the latents tackle such perception, readiness, and willingness of big business sectors and members of the industry that will be used in support of the research hypothesis.